Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new and hopefully improved Disgustingly Adorable. Not much has actually changed. So I'm going to be diving into a book now, Capitalist Realism. One thing I want to say is if I follow the structure and start going through books, I really want to make sure that they can apply to your life, that there's use for it, that it's not just this like ivory tower knowledge. If I'm ever going off about something and you have no idea how it applies to anything, then just ask me, right? Just be like, hey, what does this even matter? Alright, so Capitalist Realism, which is essentially a critique of late capitalism. This was published in 2009, so it's fairly recent. A lot of social critiques that I see, at least on the internet and so forth, 99% of them are just looking at the symptoms. This, I think, really dives to the core problem. The first chapter of this book is titled, "It's Easier to Imagine the End of the World Than the End of Capitalism." And that's kind of what he uses as his definition of capitalist realism. Capitalist realism is reality as created or portrayed by capitalism. Here he says, the widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible even to imagine a coherent alternative to it. My teacher, he challenged people, think of a utopia, think of another system that would work, right? And that's really hard to do. It's easy to think of dystopia, but it's almost impossible to think of a utopia. And he moves into like V for Vendetta and all that, and he says, the war on terror has prepared us for such a development. The normalization of crisis produces a situation in which the repealing of measures brought in to deal with an emergency becomes unimaginable. So we have these measures brought in right after 9/11, because now we're in a state of emergency. We're dealing with terrorists, we have a war against terror. But now repealing those emergencies, right, moving back to our normal state before that is unimaginable. There's going to be a time where we take all the airport security away. Like, are we going to feel safe? Logically, if that was brought in because of terror, if we're no longer under a terrorist threat, why would we still need that? He starts off with the movie Children of Men, alright, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic film. This idea, the Children of Men, what he mentions is the scene in which all these paintings are locked up in this building. All these paintings are in this building, all these cultural icons and so forth. And the problem is, I guess there's like I haven't actually seen that movie, but there's a problem that everyone is sterile. No more children are being born. So what good is all this art if there's not going to be anyone to see it in the future? And he says that that's sort of what we're living through right now, right? It hasn't already happened, or it's not down the road, we're in that process. And the idea behind that, he says right here, how long can a culture persist without the new? What happens if the young are no longer capable of producing surprises? So this, the sterility refers to the fact that everything new being created is just recreation of the old. And that's what he says, the point that we're at right now. Could it be that there are no breaks, no shocks of new to come? Such anxieties tend to result in a bipolar oscillation. The weak messianic hope that there must be something new on the way lapses into Moore's conviction that nothing new can ever happen. The focus shifts from the next big thing to the last big thing. How long ago did it happen? Just how big was it? So we're constantly looking for the next big thing. And then we see that there can't be a next big thing, so we look at the last big thing. And it's this back and forth switch. But I think, you know, if you look at like Apple, everything they're producing, it's just variations, right? They have a computer, a music player, and a phone, and they kind of put some of those together, and then they kind of put some other in a tablet, and a watch, and then glasses. It's the same variation, right? The new iPhone, I don't know what the differences are. You've even seen those videos of like, what are you excited about the new iPhone? And they're just like, it's new. I'm not just trying to, you know, dig on Apple, but I think it serves as a good example. The exhaustion of the future does not leave us with the past. Tradition counts for nothing when it is no longer contested and modified. A culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all. So we have this fixation on the past, right? Because of this lack of the new, we look to the past, right? And we preserve it, we set it up in museums, but there's no function to it. And the symbols have really lost their meaning in there. The power of capitalist realism derives in part from the way that capitalism subsumes and consumes all previous history. One effect of its system of equivalence, can also assign all cultural objects, whether they are religious, iconography, pornography, or Das Kapital a monetary value. And so capitalism has the ability to it assigns a monetary value to everything. So you have the statue of this god that's worshipped by culture, right? It is this holy, divine figure. Well, it's worth this much money, right? Next to this painting, which is worth this much money. It gets absorbed and consumed into capitalism, right? And you're going to see this played up later too, that capitalism just sort of rolls over everything, and it takes it over and it recreates it, right? It sort of digests it and creates something new, right? So reality as created by capitalism, culture as created by capitalism. And the conversion of practices and rituals into merely aesthetic objects, the beliefs of previous culture are objectively ironized, transformed into artifacts. So here's this process happening of converting these practices, these rituals, into just aesthetics, right? That's all they are now, is aesthetics. They've completely left their function behind. So now he says, yet this turn from belief to aesthetics, from engagement to spectatorship, is held to be one of the virtues of capitalist realism. So now this is held to be a good thing, that the beliefs have moved to aesthetics. The engagement has moved to just spectatorship, to where you're just seeing and viewing. We have these values to preserve culture, but we strip it away from its context. Where all existence is evaluated in terms of money alone, is presented to us as an ideal. To justify their conservatism, partisans of the established order cannot really call ideal or wonderful, so instead they have decided to say that all the rest is horrible. No one can really say it's good. But what we do is we say everything else is bad, right? Communism is bad. Any other form of social structure is bad, it's horrible. What we are dealing with now is not the incorporation of materials that previously seemed to possess subversive potentials, but instead their pre-corporation. Alternative and independent don't designate something outside the mainstream culture. Rather, they are styles, in fact, the dominant styles within the mainstream culture. So going back to capitalism as this consuming entity, these alternative styles, anything outside of it or created to be outside of it, gets consumed by capitalist realism. It gets consumed and turned into and brought back into it. So the alternative and independent, right? Alternative music is the biggest form of music, right? What is it alternative to? Alternative lifestyles. You can walk into stores, you can buy alternative things. So what are they really alternatives to, right? Maybe at one point they started off as alternative, but then they've been consumed, they've been absorbed into capitalism and are now a part of the mainstream. And then he goes on to talk about Kurt Cobain, if any of you are Nirvana fans. Cobain seemed to give weary voice to the despondency of the generation that had come after their history, whose every move was anticipated, tracked, bought, and sold before it had even happened. Cobain knew that he was just another piece of spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV. Cobain found himself in a world in which stylistic innovation is no longer possible. So here he's painting Kurt Cobain's conflict as this realization that he doesn't want to be absorbed into this, and yet everything that he does gets absorbed into it, and he can't fight it because that act of fighting it gets absorbed into it. And so nothing new is being done because it's just everything is being digested and shitted out by capitalism. He talks about Scarface, Godfather, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. This type of film arises from their common claim to have stripped the world of sentimental illusions and seen it for what it really is. A Hobbesian war of all against all. So Hobbes, he said that humans were angry, violent, bitter creatures that lived short, brutish lives, and all they did was be in conflict and fight against each other. And so this viewing the world for what it really is, that comes from capitalist realism, right? Because capitalist capitalism depends on humans in competition, business structure, the economy, all that. And so these films and comic books and so forth, they perpetuate this idea that that's just the way the world is. That's just naturally how we are as humans. That's what it needs us to believe in order for it to continue. So be very careful whenever someone talks about human nature or the way things are. You'll start to see that there's very little that's just the way we are. So that sums up the first chapter, and I will see you guys next week. Take it easy. necessarily need a lot of editing.